There's a state park today where steam trains carry tourists up a mountain, built on top of what used to be one of the largest sawmills on Earth, abandoned so completely that the company that ran it never came back to even take the machines. There's a square mile of land in Tennessee that was once so poisoned by industry it stayed barren and red for almost 100 years. Bare enough that pilots reportedly used it as a landmark from the air. And there's a mountain in West Virginia where the largest armed uprising in American labor history happened, and decades later, the coal industry that caused it tried to legally erase the site from the map a second time. This is Appalachia, not the postcard version, the version that got used up and left behind. Here are 8 places that prove it. In 1901, the West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company built a company town from scratch around a single purpose, feeding one of the largest band sawmills in the world. At its peak, Cass processed enormous quantities of red spruce off the surrounding mountains, hauling logs down by geared steam locomotives built specifically for the steep grades, engines too specialized to be useful almost anywhere else. By 1942, the spruce forests were stripped bare. The mill shut down. The company didn't bother removing most of its equipment. It simply wasn't worth the cost. Decades later, the state of West Virginia turned the remains into Cass Scenic Railroad State Park, where the same geared locomotives that once hauled timber now haul tourists up Bald Knob, past company houses that are rented out instead of lived in by mill workers. Copper mining started here in 1843. By the early 1900s, the smelting process required to extract it released sulfur dioxide into the air at a scale that killed every tree, shrub, and blade of grass for miles. What was left wasn't just an abandoned mine, it was an entire denuded landscape, stripped down to bare red clay hills that locals nicknamed the Copper Basin Desert. Mining finally stopped in 1987. By then, the damage had already outlived multiple generations of workers. Decades of reforestation efforts have since brought some green back, but parts of the basin are still recovering. A slower motion abandonment than any ghost town, where it wasn't the people who left first. It was the land that died around them. The Consolidation Coal Company built Van Leer in the early 1900s as a model coal camp. Rows of identical company houses, a company store, and a payroll that ran almost entirely on its own currency, scrip, redeemable only at that same company store. In 1932, one of the camp's miners' daughters was born here, Loretta Lynn, who would later turn the town's hardship into one of the best-selling careers in country music history. The mines shut down in the late 1940s as cheaper extraction methods elsewhere made Van Leer's seams unprofitable. Without the company, there was no reason for the company town to exist. Most of the houses are gone now. What's left is a small coal mining museum and a name that, outside of one song, most of the country has otherwise forgotten. Coalwood existed for one company and one purpose. The Carter Coal Company built it, owned it, and ran every part of daily life inside it. At its peak, more than 2,000 people lived here, almost entirely dependent on a single mine. In 1986, that mine closed. Without an alternative industry to fall back on, the population collapsed to a few hundred almost immediately. Coalwood would likely be unknown today if not for one detail. A NASA engineer named Homer Hickam grew up here, and his memoir about building rockets as a coal miner's son became the basis for the film October Sky. Meaning the town's most famous export, in the end, wasn't coal. It was the story of a kid who wanted to leave it. Notice the pattern forming. None of these towns failed because people stopped working hard. They failed because they were built around exactly one industry, owned almost entirely by exactly one company, and the moment that company decided the math stopped working, there was no town left underneath it. That's not a ghost story. That's a business model. If you want to see exactly how far that model goes, stick around, because the next one isn't just a town. It's an entire county. In 1917, U.S. Steel needed coal to feed its mills, so its subsidiary built Lynch from nothing in a remote Kentucky hollow, engineering an entire city block by block, with its own hospital, theater, and segregated neighborhoods reflecting the era. At its peak in the 1920s through 1940s, Lynch held close to 10,000 residents, making it briefly one of the largest coal camps in the world. Mechanization reduced how many workers a mine actually needed. Demand shifted. By the time U.S. Steel scaled back operations decades later, there was no version of Lynch that could survive without it. Today, fewer than 700 people remain, under a tenth of its peak population, living inside infrastructure built for a city 10 times its current size. This one isn't a single town. It's nearly the whole county. McDowell County peaked at almost 100,000 residents around 1950, built almost entirely on coal employment spread across dozens of small camps. Anewalt, Berwind, Kerda, and many more, each one a miniature version of Cass or Coalwood. As mechanization and mine closures hit through the second half of the century, those same small camps emptied out one after another, with no single dramatic closure date, just a slow, continuous bleed. Today, McDowell County's population sits under 20,000, a loss of more than 80% from its peak. It's regularly cited as one of the most rapidly depopulating counties in the entire United States. Multiply Coalwood's story by 30, spread across one county, and that's McDowell. Founded by a coal and iron company that eventually became part of Clinchfield Coal, Dante grew through the early 1900s into a fully self-contained operation. Its own school system, its own row housing, its own economy running almost entirely on company wages. For decades it functioned as intended. As mine mechanization across the region reduced the workforce needed to extract the same amount of coal, and as remaining operations consolidated elsewhere, Dante's population fell to a small fraction of its peak. What remains today is a quiet reminder that a company town's survival was never actually about the coal running out. It was about whether the company still needed as many people to get it. In August 1921, thousands of coal miners marched on Blair Mountain to unionize against company control in what became the largest armed labor uprising in American history outside the Civil War. An actual battlefield with miners on one side and a private army backed by coal operators and eventually federal troops on the other. Decades later, the irony got worse. In 2009, Blair Mountain was added to the National Register of Historic Places, recognizing it as one of the most significant labor battlegrounds in the country. Coal companies holding mining rights on the mountain challenged the listing, and it was removed the same year amid the dispute over mountaintop removal mining on the very ridge where the battle happened. The site that workers once fought to protect from total company control nearly got erased from historical recognition by that same industry. Twice. 8 places, 1 pattern. Build it fast around one resource. Run it until the resource or the profit margin runs out, then walk away from everything that isn't worth carrying. The coal left. The towns didn't get to. If there's a place near you that disappeared the same way, send the coordinates. That's exactly what this channel exists to find.